make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
What's important to know about that case in particular is kind of two other aspects. One is there was a thing called the Measures of the Administration of the Internet Religious Information Regulations that came into effect in September. And these were regulations that basically, made it kind of a whitelist. Like if you were a religious personnel communicating on the internet, you had to do it through certain portals. And anything kind of outside of that would be considered illegal.
Hey there, Faithful Politics listeners. If you're joining us on our podcast stream, and viewers, if you're joining us on YouTube, guys, thanks for being here for another episode of Faithful Politics Podcast. I'm your faithful host, Josh Bertram, and of course, I'm joined by our political host, Will Wright. Will, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Good to see you. What's your shirt today? I need to see it.
It says,
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I wore it because today I felt like a plastic bag. Do you ever feel like a plastic bag?
I love it. I think that's great. And man, we're just so glad that you guys joined us for another episode where we try to dig into really interesting things and important things in our culture and in church and all sorts of stuff and get expert opinions on it. And today we actually have William Nee back for, I don't know, what is it, the 4th, 5th? You know what I keep saying? 6th, 7th. And then my kids go 6, 7.
7.
And I'm just like...
That's demonic, Josh.
I know it's demonic, and I'm possessed by it. It's crazy.
I have 2 little teenagers, so they're always saying that.
So you understand our pain. Well, of course, you've been on before, but just so our audience, if anyone's listening for the first time, here you are the Research and Advocacy Coordinator at Chinese Human Rights Defenders, where he focuses on a wide range of human rights issues affecting activists and ordinary citizens in China. He also served as a China researcher, and business and human rights analyst at Amnesty International, and as development director at China Labor Bulletin. And you write frequently and have learned a lot about Chinese politics and its relationship to religious freedom. And we'd happy to have you back on to talk with us. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks a lot, Josh. And just one quick correction. I've actually moved on from CHRD, where I used to work in Chinese human rights, and I'm now at the National Endowment for Democracy, which is an organization founded by Ronald Reagan to promote democracy and human rights around the world. And so we're the largest grant-making institution to democracy and human rights groups around the world, but still kind of in the same line of work and looking very much at China and Chinese politics.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for that correction. I don't know. How do I duly note this? Can I just say duly noted? Duly noted. Yes. Okay. That's good. Man, I'm actually really excited to have you on. And it's weird because I've never once in my life, I got to be honest with you. Well, do you prefer Will or William? I'm sorry. I'm running.
Well, we'll just go with William to...
Yeah, not to confuse. That's good. So, William, I've never once been excited about a Chinese Communist Party plenary meeting or plenum or whatever it's called, this massive meeting. And I kind of wanted you to come on and talk about this because there's been some stuff in the news about persecution in China. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this in terms of the Muslim population there. And now, of course, it's not new for the Christian population to experience some kind of persecution there. And I would just love if you'd help us understand, though, the plenary meeting. What is this? What happened here? Why is it significant?
Yeah, so the Chinese Communist Party convenes plenums, and there's usually 5 for each term. And there was some buzz about whether they were going to recalibrate. This is where all the Central Committee members come to meet. And oftentimes they discuss important policy directions, maybe new directions for the country in terms of economic measures, policies, sometimes law. But this one, most commentators, they met about a month ago, and most commentators thought that the the 5-year plan that came out of it really didn't have too much new. It's things that the Communist Party has kind of been talking about for a long time in terms of its, the use of new technologies, and China really wants to become the kind of the master of that, ensuring they have their own supply chains and so on. The thing that caught people by surprise, though, is that for the military leaders who showed up, many of them were missing. And there's been kind of a purge that's been going on at the People's Liberation Army, which is the PLA, which is the Communist Party controlled military. And a lot of people don't really know what to make of this. Xi Jinping, who we often call the president, is actually the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, in addition to being the president, and he's the chairman of the Central Military Commission. So he has 3 roles, and he oversees the PLA. And for whatever reason, many of the senior leaders of the PLA have been purged. And so that was really kind of the most notable thing that's gone on from this. And there's a lot of different theories why, but at the end of the day, we don't really know. But there's something strange going on with purging of senior military leaders.
So I'm coming into this cold. Josh has really been reading up on this and studying this a lot more than I have. So can you just give us a little bit of a background of like, what are these plenum meetings? Like, what's kind of the history of them, and is there sort of like an American context that can kind of help, us better understand like how it works within their system of government?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say that there's no easy comparison for people who are used to democratic systems or U.S. politics. I suppose in a way it's a little bit similar to every 4 years where you have like the Democratic National Convention or the Republican equivalent, where they come together and there's maybe party speeches. And, in some cases they try to have a party platform going forward. So it is a way in which the party can talk to itself, can come up with its own internal structure, like the policies going forward. They come out with important readouts that they put out to the public, which gives everybody within the party system kind of an understanding of where the party is going, including, people in state-owned enterprises, or even gives private investors kind of an understanding of what the party's thinking may be. So I would put it like in line with, I guess that's probably the best equivalent I could think of. It's like, every 4 years when we have the conventions.
So I think that's an interesting analogy. Of course, though, we normally don't have the same kinds of fear, at least now, when there's people missing in those conventions, that maybe they might have gone to a better place. I don't know what the phrase is in Chinese. I wonder, although interestingly, and this is totally aside, but Will, do you remember when we were told that if you put someone in black and white, it means that they're dead? In a picture in China? I think someone told us. Is that true, William? Is that? I know this is. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean it's. I don't know if if they're in black and white. Sometimes people will go to the websites of various ministries to see if people are still viewable. Sometimes people go missing for long periods of time, and there's no real explanation. So it is, one of the things that to know about China, the Xi Jinping is when he came to power, he started this anti-corruption drive. And corruption is run by the central CCDI, it's the central disciplinary organ of the party. And discipline is not only for corruption, but it's also for party discipline. So in other words, like, are you towing the party line? Are you making statements or doing things in your personal life that may be at odds with the party, like forming cliques, forming alliances with other people, or even having mistresses in addition to corruption? And they have gone after hundreds of thousands of party cadres, including some of the very top-ranking people. So this, in some ways, the purge of the PLA that's happening isn't new, but it's difficult for outsiders to really make much of. And people will often go to the websites to see if, people are still there,
Just
whether their pictures are still on the website. So
yeah.
You kind of have to get this information through various creative ways.
And that makes sense. I guess what I'm really trying to get at is even more clearly, what is remarkable about the fact? So you said it's not new, but is there anything remarkable about the fact that there have been these people missing? And I guess what I'm trying to connect is, I guess some of the stuff I saw is this hasn't been, no sitting CMC member has been removed since the Cultural Revolution. I don't know if that's true or not, but is that true? What is this vote essentially,
well,
if anything, in your mind? If you
in my
can
mind,
answer.
and I will say that I am really not, we have many people who are kind of PLA analysts who would probably have great takes on this. There was speculation that some of the PLA purges meant that Xi Jinping had lost power because some of these people were actually in his networks. They were kind of his proteges, like people who were owed their loyalty to him. So people said, well, if they're going down, then obviously that means that Xi has lost power. I would refer people to perhaps Jamestown Review, which is a publication that looks at this and I think does a remarkable job. But they had a very good analysis over the summer that basically argued that no, it's not really evidence that Xi Jinping has lost power. And kind of in the Chinese tradition with Mao Zedong, purging people is a way to actually gain power. People are more nervous. They're arguably more loyal. So that could be one possibility. There could be possibilities over substantive questions in the military that, people on the outside have no real insight into. So I wish I had a better answer, but a lot of times with elite Chinese politics, the best you can say is, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. So how is this meeting tied to religious freedom more broadly?
I would say that the top level meetings generally have little day-to-day impact on religious freedom per se. Probably the most important aspect of religious freedom that has happened in China in the last decade or so was, I believe it was in 2015 or 16, when Xi Jinping made a very bold speech on religion, on how the party should handle religion. And he essentially said, we are going to stick with the way that the party manages religion. He wants all cadres to be Marxist atheists and to kind of reinforce that, which, I think most party officials probably are atheist anyway, but particularly in Tibet, where people are predominantly Buddhist, and in the Muslim areas, whether that's in the Uyghur, they call it the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, or Uyghurs would call it East Turkestan, or in other areas where there's Hui. Hui are kind of ethnically Chinese people who are Muslims. Whether or not you enforce that is actually quite significant. And they also had a very important policy to Sinicize religions. So China only has 5 official religions. So they have Protestantism, Catholicism, Buddhism, Taoism, and is that the 5? Yeah. And anything, they wanted to make those religions more compatible with Chinese culture and particularly Chinese Communist Party rule. And so they've asserted much more authority over those religions. Meanwhile, in areas like Zhejiang, which is the province that's right south of Shanghai and is basically China's most prosperous province, they do a lot of international trade and are very successful. They have some really beautiful cities like Hangzhou, where Alibaba and other corporations are located. In that very prosperous province, there's a lot of Christians. And the government there, the provincial government, had a campaign to tear down crosses, to tear down crucifixes, and demolish churches. And hundreds of churches were destroyed in that area. So they came out, Xi had this speech on Sinicizing religion. They then had subsequent laws. They revised the relevant laws regarding religion. And since then, there's been crackdowns and stricter, tightening of religious life as it relates to both, Buddhists in Tibet, certainly in the Uyghur region, where, over somewhere between 1 to 2 million people were put in re-education camps. And, that includes, the Uyghur Human Rights Project did a report, that includes many, many imams and other religious figures. People could be sent there for having any known prayer life, for going on the Hajj pilgrimage, for wearing veils or having what they call abnormal beards. So really any sort of prayer life, prayer mats would be criteria used to detain someone. And whether if you had downloaded a Quran on your app, on your phone, and they checked your phone and found that, boom, you're in the camps. So there was a huge crackdown on religious life there. And then as it relates to Protestants, there was kind of a loosey-goosey, laissez-faire attitude with respect to house churches. Kind of like, well, you technically should belong to the Protestant Three-Self Church, which is like the official church. But there were lots of house churches meeting in small venues or people's homes. And these were kind of allowed to continue to a large extent, especially if they weren't causing any political trouble, weren't crossing red lines. But they've really started to clamp down on that. And that has accelerated through the last 10 years. But especially this year, it appears that there's a whole new wave of crackdowns on house churches in China.
And yeah, that's where I want to get there. And I guess part of what I'm trying to do is establish like an understanding of what is actually happening in China, who controls the levers and has power. I mean, I think people know. Well, it's kind of like, the Xi Jinping, they might know that name, or they might know that it's a communist government, so sort of, and that, but it was more capitalistic at some times than less. They might have some idea, or even, they might hear conflicting things and not even know that, hey, actually there are religions. They do recognize certain religions in China, but then what does that actually even mean? And really even focusing in on this one aspect, I think, from what I understand that came out of this plenary meeting, was this emphasis on national security, social stability, and kind of like having control of the ideological domain, which I think it seems would directly connect in some ways with these crackdowns of trying to find, like, really control society more. And I guess to the degree that you can, what is the plan? What is this tightening maybe going to look like? Do we know?
Yeah.
And how is that going to affect churches? And then maybe we can bridge there then to this situation that's happening.
Josh, I think you're right that there was at the plenum emphasis on national security, but that has really been kind of a hallmark of the Xi Jinping era. And not just Xi Jinping, but this really, he's proverbially ramped it up to 11, But he's done this since he took power kind of back in 2013. So if you kind of want to take a step back, the first decade of this century, from, 2001, China joined the WTO. And then, really just the economy went gangbusters. I mean, it was GDP growth was growing at anywhere from, 8 to 11%. If you were on the ground in China at the time, it was just staggering. Like you could go to one place, view it, and come back a year later, and like it would be totally demolished and new buildings would be up. They were putting in infrastructure everywhere. So this was going on, and it was kind of like the Wild West in terms of how things were developing. And the government was definitely censoring the internet and trying to censor the press, but there was a degree of openness just because there was so much growth and so much kind of vitality, really. But this like last decade they've really kind of, as the economy slowed, arguably Xi Jinping felt that civil society, the growth of religions, the growth of different ideologies had all kind of gotten a little bit outside of the Communist Party's control. And so his main overarching goal is to wield back control through all these different sectors of life. So whether that's entertainment, they've put more stricter regulations on what can be in TV and movies. In terms of the internet, they've really censored the internet to a much greater extent. In academia, they've put the screws on academia, and the CCDI, the disciplinary unit, has actually investigated many of the top universities. They've constricted the space for private businesses. So China, of course, had a very vibrant entrepreneurial scene, but many of the entrepreneurs have had to give up power. Some of them have gone abroad. Many of them have tried to get out, but they've kind of replaced that to a greater, putting more resources into state-owned enterprises. They've kind of cracked down on ideologies, whether that's, feminism, the LGBT community, civil society groups promoting the rule of law. In 2015, they had a crackdown on lawyers, human rights lawyers. Over 300 people were detained on one day, July 9th, 2015. And many of them served prison time. Many of them were tortured really quite badly. Independent labor organizers. So all of these, they've cracked down on like a variety of sectors. And for religion, they're very suspicious of religion, particularly what they view as religions that have connections with foreign influences. So whether that's Islam, which kind of looks elsewhere for inspiration, or Buddhism, which, you have the Dalai Lama in India now, and Tibet has its own religious traditions that the party doesn't completely control. And then with Christianity, obviously the Catholic Church has very strong ties to the Vatican, and they've had their deal there. And then with Protestant churches, there's a lot of connection historically with churches throughout the world, the United States, for sure. But also, there's Protestant communities that have been inspired by people in Europe or even Korea or other areas. So they view all of that as a potential political threat. I think, and any organizing outside of the party's control is also seen as a threat, even if what they're doing is relatively benign. So, the fact that you may be able to get hundreds of people to organize, to come together, and even if you're going to do things that are like, collections to help the needy, or, street sweeping, or something very beneficial for the community, that's still, from the Communist Party's point of view, a threat because it's happening outside the party's control. So I don't know if that made sense at all.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious, like when I hear the word, and I would probably argue when most Americans hear the word religious liberty or religious freedom, that connotates something to them, like they may think Constitution, or they may think, I don't know, a mixed bag of religions in a pluralistic society. Mm-hmm. But like, if you were a citizen of China, like, is that a concept that's understood kind of in that same way, or is it only understood in kind of like those five main beliefs that you just talked about?
Well, that's a great question, Will. I would say that from the party's point of view, they would say, I mean, if I were the party right now and you were asking me, I would say, China absolutely believes in religious freedom. It's in our constitution. Everybody can have religious freedom according to the law. And according to the law is the huge caveat, which means you can only do what the party allows you to do. Go to the worship services at the party places that they've instituted with ministers that they have ordained and control, using texts that they have pre-approved. So it's all allowed, but allowed with the party's oversight. And anything outside that system is the threat. And that's what, they revised the religious affairs regulations, I believe in 2018, to more tightly control that. And as a result, any worship that's happening outside of that system could be deemed illegal. And in fact, many pastors have been detained recently on charges of either illegal business operations or fraud. So, in other words, if you were having a Bible study in a church with, let's say 100 people, and they're giving donations to Josh, if you're not part of the Three Self Church and the government finds this out, they could arrest you on the charge of illegal business operations or fraud. And they've done this in dozens of cases in recent years. So I guess that from the point of view of the average person, they probably, they're probably questioning whether there's religious freedom if it's a question that they're thinking about.
Yeah, is one way to kind of think about what you just said, like there's Christianity, Protestantism. Man, I can't get that word. Anyways, there's Christianity there, and it's all controlled by the government. Like, would one way to kind of think about that control would be like a denomination, such as, like and I would just use Southern Baptist, just because that's the only one I can think of right now. Like their views on women being pastors. So in the sense of like they're practicing Christianity, but there is a version of Christianity that they are practicing and kind of making mandatory, and anything outside of that would be bad. Mm-hmm. Like is that kind of one way to kind of think about sort of how religion works in that country?
Yeah, it could be one way to think of it. If you're more cynical, which I guess I am.
Which I am.
I guess you could say that ultimately the Chinese Communist Party wants to manage religion in the sense that they recognize that it's a very powerful force in life, and especially in ethnically minority areas, historically they've sometimes taken a more delicate approach in managing religion when they don't crack down immediately if they feel that there might be a very hostile reaction to that. And in fact, Xi Jinping's father was Xi Jinping was a Communist Party leader, one of the most senior, who was also very heavily involved in managing religions, whether that's Tibetan Buddhism or Islam. And he had often taken cautious approaches, not because, he was an atheist, but he did that because he didn't want a violent backlash if they moved too quickly. So from that point of view, it was a cost-benefit calculation on how tightly should I control this, with the ultimate goal of getting rid of religion altogether. So they currently don't allow anyone under 18 to go to religious services, to get religious training. That is illegal. So essentially, they want to stop religion over time. So I guess your analogy with like a Southern Baptist group who's trying to maybe police things outside of their faith parameters, it's kind of like that, except your Southern Baptist person most likely would strongly believe in their faith and want it to continue. I'd say where the analogy breaks down is the party's trying to control things with the ultimate objective of kind of having things like wither on the vine.
I think that's absolutely fascinating that that's their strategy. It's almost like we can pretend to be religiously tolerant while at the same time essentially killing it at the root, or trying to, at least.
Yeah.
Or trying to make it so that you can't have good leaders who can then help people and train people, right? Whatever it is. So you're going for that leadership. And it makes me think about, like, there are specific cases. There's one I'm thinking of, and just to make sure I get it right. It happened in October 2025. Chinese authorities carried out a large-scale coordinated actions across multiple provinces targeting Zion Church and affiliated house church networks. It says nearly 30 pastors, church staff, and leaders of Zion Church, including its founder, Jin Mingri, I don't know if I'm saying that right, also known as Ezra Jin, were detained in multiple cities. Formal charges for at least some of the detained include illegal use of information networks, a crime under Chinese criminal law tied to the church's online ministry and digital outreach. And then the crackdown is widely described by human rights groups and foreign observers as one of the largest church crackdowns operations in China in years. And so a reason I wanted to make sure I got on the same page is, there's this thing that's happened right in the same month as this plenary meeting. And there's this almost continuation of this, and you said the word Sinicization. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
And I would love for you to help us understand, like, what is Sinicization, and connected to why this is happening to these churches. Like why are these house churches a threat? Why are they an issue under this policy?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Sinicization, they basically that means to Chineseify, and there's another word to maybe use. And I think it comes from the suspicion from Chinese Communist Party leaders that, whether it's Tibetan Buddhism or Islam or Christianity are not sufficiently Chinese. And so they want to make it more compatible with Chinese culture and the Chinese development path, as they might say, meaning the Communist Party's rule, and allow kind of politics to more directly be ingrained in, teachings and doctrine. In the Uyghur region and also in the Hui region, the Muslim areas, they've taken down kind of Arabic-inspired maybe minarets and other architecture, like literally demolished them, and have kind of made the buildings look more Chinese, or they've taken down Arabic from various mosques and have made just demolished that. So in some cases, it can have actual changes to the building to make it look like more Chinese. But in terms of Christianity, what you were saying there for the Zion Church, I don't think that that's actually directly impacted by the plenum. Well, I mean, maybe it was. I mean, it did happen kind of before then. And oftentimes before important political meetings, they will put a lid on dissidents and like not allow them to travel. They will kind of put them under house arrest. That does happen from time to time. So it's not completely implausible. But what's important to know about that case in particular is kind of two other aspects. One is there was a thing called the Measures of the Administration of the Internet Religious Information Regulations that came into effect in September. And these were regulations that basically, made it kind of a whitelist. Like if you were a religious personnel communicating on the internet, you had to do it through certain portals. And anything kind of outside of that would be considered illegal. And why that's important for Zion Church is they were kind of a sprawling house church network that in 2018, the government tried to shut down. They tried to put surveillance cameras inside the church, the party officials did, and they refused to do so. And as a result, they had to kind of go to a hybrid model, some in church meetings, some like online. And through the online format, once COVID hit, it actually was very helpful to the church, and it was very helpful. And they became very, they had over 10,000 members in multiple cities throughout China. But they've used this charge, the illegal dissemination of information online, is the charge that they initially detained these people under. And 18 were arrested just 2 days ago. And another 8 were given bail. But I think that what this shows is it's kind of the next stage in China's crackdown on religious freedom, is that they're afraid of people spreading the gospel online. And so this church, which is a very kind of mainstream Protestant church, Ezra Jin, as you mentioned, the pastor, he's a guy who went to the Fuller Seminary for a while in the U.S.
Really?
Yeah. So, you can think of kind of probably similar, you think of like Rick Warren or, someone like that. He's kind of very much in that mold of just kind of a mainstream Protestant evangelical preacher, and his congregation very much wants to be patriotic. They very much want to be seen as good Chinese citizens who are helping for the best of their community. They do not want to be dissidents against the Communist Party. That's not in any way kind of the goal. They're just very much focused on their religion. But for whatever reason, the government saw that as a threat. Now, so whether that's connected to those new regulations, which went into effect in September, just a month before they were detained, or like 10 days before they were detained, or whether that was, some people speculate, their detention may have been somewhat related to, President Trump meeting with Xi Jinping ahead of their first meeting in this Trump second term. Some people had speculated that as a potential rationale. ultimately, we're not quite sure. But it is true that it is one of the most significant crackdowns because they detained people in multiple areas and multiple cities on the same day in a coordinated raid, brought them all to the same city, like collected them from Beijing, Shanghai, and all around, and brought them to one city, Beihai, in the south. So that's a very kind of unique thing that shows that there's a national level coordination going on.
Yeah, that's a sophisticated coordination. I was going to say, like, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how it compares to other, but that was obviously very, very intentional.
Very intentional. It's not just like
level.
It's not just a local leader deciding to go after a pastor
right
because of their own discretion, which, whether that's good or bad, that's this is a national level decision to go after this church, essentially.
Yeah, if you were just like a ordinary Christian attending a house church, like today, like what does your daily life look like? I mean, I'm assuming you are still going to your job and doing whatever it is you're doing, but it's like, do Christians in China like wear their faith kind of on their sleeve? Like can you stand out basically by just being a Christian? I mean, I suppose the Bible says we should, right? Like, or at least people should be able to tell for Christian. So yeah, just walk us through like what's the day in the life of a Christian in China?
That's a great question. Well, I think it kind of depends maybe on where the people are, whether they go to whether it's a house church or the Three Self Church. But I would say that overall, it may not be that different from the U.S., that people will probably go to their Sunday worship services, like listen to sermons online. That's been a very kind of popular way, and spread messages with their fellow congregants. So overall, I would hesitate to say that it's dramatically different from what we might think of in the U.S.
Yeah, this whole thing is it's concerning for sure. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to pinpoint on why I'm concerned beyond just obviously it's a human rights issue that should be concerning to people that believe in human rights, basic human rights. And it's like, am I concerned that this kind of thing could happen here? Am I concerned that like what is it about this that's I guess it's hitting me so much. And I guess there's this sense that, oh man, like the church is doing well in China. You always hear, I hear this, it's doing great. It's spreading like wildfire. And then to hear and see this, it just makes me think, oh man, it's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse. It feels like.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be cynical like we've talked about, but it kind of just, is Communist Party like language like become Sinicization? Is that just another word for what Xi Jinping wants, what he thinks and teaches, or is it much broader than that? Like, is he a totalitarian dictator to the extent that you would think of Stalin or someone like that, or is it he's really just trying to work through and he believes in the cause? And it's kind of two questions there. I guess I don't really understand why churches are such a big deal to China. Like, why are they so afraid of them?
You have a lot of questions there, Josh.
I know, dude. Way too many. I'm sorry. I'm thinking out loud.
A lot of wonderful questions that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I would say, does Xi Jinping believe in the cause? Here I'm just saying my own view. I think he very much does. I think he believes very strongly in the rejuvenation of China, that China was kind of a victim of the opium wars from the 1800s and was, preyed upon by foreign powers. And he wants to make China great. And he believes that the Communist Party of China is the vehicle through which that's going to be great. And his number one goal in life is to serve the party and promote the party and make it strong. And that's what he's dedicated like his whole life to. That's very clear. And so that's his mission. And the party, going back to its Marxist Leninist roots, it's very much against religion. I mean, it's, he's the one who said in his own speech that he's promoting, Marxist atheism. And so he views kind of religion as a threat. He does see it as a thing to manage, and that's where the Sinicization comes in. And I would say, going back to what I said previously, I wouldn't want to completely say that there are good people in the Three Self Church or in the various government-run churches who are, I view the party's ultimate objective is trying to make it wither on the vine, but that doesn't mean that there aren't good people working in there if you want to help it. I just want to give it that correction. But so, yeah, I think they view this Christianity as a threat. And maybe why this feels threatening is just because of the lack of clear motivation for it in a way. Sometimes when you have a dissident who speaks out, when the government cracks down on them, you can at least say, well, I understand the clear motivation behind it.
Right.
But I think the baffling thing with this is that here you have just kind of a normal evangelical kind of, church that is just trying to do, spread the gospel and they're cracked down upon. And so it's kind of baffling in that way. But, I've been fortunate enough to, talk with the daughter of Pastor Ezra Jin. That's Grace Drexel.
Wow.
And she was able to speak, for example, at the National Endowment for Democracy's Democracy Awards. And I've seen her give talks here in D.C. And obviously, this is a very difficult thing for her. Having her father detained and is never easy. But she does feel that it'll ultimately have some good to it. And I don't know if it's okay, but he wrote a letter from prison. If I could read just one little bit of it.
Oh man, I'd love that.
Yeah. So here's from Pastor Ezra Jin's letter. He says, "I'm gradually adjusting to life here. My blood sugar and physical discomfort are slowly improving. Don't worry about me. I find great comfort in being able to continue to endure this little suffering for the gospel. Thinking back over the years, many of our young ministers, deacons, and elders have been imprisoned for the gospel, and for those senior church leaders I respect have also suffered. When I heard these news, I was so heartbroken that I didn't know what to do. Now that I am experiencing these things myself, I feel more at peace. I'm truly joyful to be able to be among these brothers and sisters who have paid the price for the gospel. Isn't this what the Lord Jesus said? Greater love no one has than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13. So, I think for those of us who are, Christians or even of other religions, we can see the power that actually comes from true religion in a context where not doing something political, but just worshiping is something that can get you detained.
Yeah, early on in Trump's presidency this year, he signed a number of executive orders, two in particular. One was the establishment of an anti-Christian bias task force, and another one was to establish a religious liberty commission. And I'm curious, to what degree do you see America having an influence over there in China with religious liberty?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if any of those bodies have had a direct impact on this case thus far. I would say, though, that there have been some positive interventions by the government or U.S. government. So, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has spoken out in the case of the Zion Church and denounced it. There was also a resolution in the Senate, which was led by Senator Ted Cruz and Chris Coons, that was co-signed by several other senators, but those were the primary two leading it, to denounce this persecution of the Zion Church. So I think whether you look at the State Department or whether you look at members of Congress, there has been some really pretty strong denunciations of this. And, I think many other people in the foreign policy community here in D.C., like the Hudson Institute and others, have really stepped up and played a strong role in advocating for the Zion Church. But certainly, I think that religious freedom is something that is very important. And in China, it's one of the most important issues. No matter how you look at it.
Yes,
we have what's going on in the Uyghur region, which is just, it's really heartbreaking beyond belief, because we still have hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people who are detained or unaccounted for. And freedom of religion being a main driver of what the government is doing there, trying to crack down on that. We have what's going on in Tibet, where the Dalai Lama is turning 90 years old, and the government wants to control the reincarnation process for the next Dalai Lama. So, there was the Panchen Lama, who in 1995, the Panchen Lama is one of the other very important lamas in Tibetan culture. In 1995 was reincarnated, and the Dalai Lama recognized the young boy, who was a 5-year-old boy at the time, as the reincarnation. That boy has been detained for 30 years. He's the longest running political prisoner in world history. And he was the youngest at the time as well. So they are clearly, we know that once the Dalai Lama passes on, they will try to control that process and then gain support from other Buddhist countries and the international community for their fake Dalai Lama in order to secure their control over Tibet. And then we have what's going on with 100 million more Christians in China. Also, when it comes down to it, the freedom of belief, freedom of religion, what you believe in your heart, and the traditions you want to have, and the morals you want to live by, are one of the most important things, for any human being, but and certainly according to human rights law. And it should be up to normal people and not just the Communist Party.
There's such a tension that I sense in this whole thing, because you have very strong statements and I guess actions. And I'd love for you, to the extent again that to kind of outline some of the actions that the American government just in the past has taken to essentially either condemn these, clear human rights violations, whether it's Uyghur or Christian, and not just this Zion Church, which of course this is important, but it's it's one part of a larger story, in the sense of how has our foreign policy been? How has this affected our foreign policy? And I think the tension I feel is that we have had such we're so tied economically to China, and yet there's such deep ideological issues and chasms, it feels like. And it's are we just being hypocrites? At carte blanche in bank or whatever you say it. Are we just completely being hypocrites because we're just we like the cheap labor, we like the cheap stuff. And again, it's one of my multi-layered questions. But I guess it's I don't know. It's we want to condemn it, but I don't know if we're really willing to do much more beyond that. And I don't know what you think about that.
Well, Josh, I love your multi-layered questions. They're so rich, but no, it's really bringing up a lot of important points, though. I also neglected that yesterday, the Congressional Executive Commission on China, the CECC, is a body that brings together Democrats, Republicans, people from the Senate, people from the House, all together to kind of form an expert body on China. And they had a special hearing on religious freedom, partially prompted by this case of Zion Church, which is, of course, very much in the news and very important, but also talking about, what's going on in Tibet and what's going on in the Uyghur region and among Hui Muslims. So I would encourage people to Google that hearing, because there's a lot of really good testimony there, including from Grace Jin, the daughter of Ezra Jin. So, that's, that is part of the government that's trying to put a focus on these issues. But yeah, I mean, we have a very, very complicated relationship with China, and it's difficult to know how to balance not only trade and cheap stuff, but China's increasingly a powerhouse, and part of what the plenum was about was being a powerhouse in the technologies of the future, whether that's AI or EVs and green technologies. But they also have most industrial supply chains kind of run through China. So it's a question of how do we, what is exactly our balance here? And that's a question that I think that, every administration tries to balance. But, we can't let things like, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and other kind of core fundamental human rights and freedoms be lost in all of this. So that's why I am trying to highlight the people and the bodies that have really tried to bring this up. I would say one thing that all your listeners can do is there's kind of a global call for prayer for these pastors, for all the members of the church. I mean, if people are on X, they can look for Bob Fu or China Aid. This is a pastor who leads an organization called China Aid, and you can find his posts there, where the church has, I think there are more than 40 countries that have signed up to a kind of a global prayer for the members of the church. So I'd say that that's always an option for those who are the more faithful in the faithful politics side of the ledger listening on. You can also retweet, posts about this that'll help get it greater visibility.
Real fast. Is any of this stuff showing up on TikTok?
That's a great question. I am not personally on TikTok because, I am kind of worried about the security of the long-term applications, but it would be a really fascinating study. So I would say if anyone is on TikTok, and please, search for Zion Church, and we can do kind of an experiment to see to what extent, if any.
I can definitely do that.
It's okay. No, I would genuinely want to know, to what extent it's viewable there.
I really appreciate you coming on, William. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. How can people get connected to you and your work there? If you maybe explain it a little bit more and how people can get connected, with what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, so if you just go to X, I'm William Nee. I'm there. I'm also on LinkedIn. I think you could find me fairly easily. Like I said, I work at the National Endowment for Democracy. We're also on all the social media handles. And please, feel free to get connected and ask me any question on China, and I'd be happy to help answer or start a conversation.
Well, thanks again, William. It's always a pleasure. I really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Well, thanks a lot, Josh and Will. It's been great to talk to you guys as always.
Absolutely. And to our viewers, guys, thanks for spending this time with us, and our listeners. Make sure you like, subscribe, share this with someone who needs it. We're growing, and we want to continue to grow. We also have a Patreon, by the way, so make sure you check that out. We're going to keep putting more material that you won't get on the YouTube channel there, so make sure you check that out. And until next time, guys, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Thanks, and God bless.